Ayn Rand Center UK. Today we are going to be talking about International Women's Day. Yes, if you thought there was something different about the day, if you sensed something in the air, it is because the UN has said today is the day that we recognize women internationally. And here to discuss this interesting issue with me is one of my favorite people, Jonathan Hoenig. How are you doing out there in Chicago, my friend?
We're starting to warm up, Mark, and it's great to be with you. And I think it's ironic that today the UN has bequeathed or said that we should be all celebrating women, because here at the Ayn Rand Center UK, we're celebrating a woman every day, and obviously by the name of Ayn Rand, whose accomplishments I assure you that those at the UN probably won't be mentioning today. So I mean, the irony is that should not be lost on our audience. And thank you. We see Robert there, equal to reality. A lot of our YouTube members and super chatters as well. We're here celebrating and learning about the philosophy of a really extraordinary woman that my guess is most of the people celebrating Women's Day today have probably never even heard of, let alone read.
Yeah, I think women who are perceived to be on the right side of the political spectrum, and I don't know that Rand necessarily identified that way, but that's certainly the way people identify her today. Maybe like an Isabel Patterson too, and some of the libertarian thinkers that Rose Wilder Lane, Mary Wollstonecraft, these people who are innovators in their own way. I doubt that they will be honored as well in this International Women's Day. What do you think of this whole concept of honoring groups of people?
Yeah, well, Miss Rand's thoughts. As you mentioned, Mark, it's the UN who has done this, and we did a little bit of research. Our crack team of the Ayn Rand Center UK. Just look at first of all, Miss Rand's thoughts on the UN are widely known. You should certainly Google them and get a sense of what she thought of the UN. But just to get a sense of the kind of lunacy of this, just look at some of the days they're celebrating this month. Today is International Women's Day. Tomorrow is International Day of Women Judges. It's International Day of Happiness a few days after that. So there's a lot of celebrating of days, I guess, going on day after day after day. And, to your point, this idea of celebrating this particular racial or gender group and it makes me think of a message from Miss Rand from a great recording, Ford Hall Forum from 1972, one of her speeches called A Nation's Unity. She was talking about it in kind of the conscious of this racial divisionism, if you will. But she said, you've never thought of it before because you've become race conscious and try to untangle your own ancestry. You find it so mixed that you cannot qualify for any of the groups into which your community is based. The Afro-Americans, the Chicano-Americans, the Italo-Americans, the Jewish Americans, the Irish Americans, and you are just a mongrel American, so am I. Kind of making that point that, these days what's celebrated is not just your own individual achievements, but you're belonging to some type of a group of which you really had no choice in even being part of. There's extraordinary women out there. We'll talk about some of them, including Miss Rand, but not, being born in a particular gender has nothing to do with the choices that you make with your life or the achievements that you do or do not achieve.
Well, go figure. A morally compromised organization based in collectivism arbitrarily names certain days after collectivist ideas. How surprising is that?
Yeah. Please.
No, you go ahead. I thought I interrupted you.
No, so I think the naysayers would, or the advocates of this type of thing say, we need positive role models. I'm kind of, again, playing a little bit of devil's advocate because I'm getting a sense of where you stand on this issue of, do we need an International Women's Day? They'd say, we have younger people who necessarily don't know history. We need days like today to honor and highlight, I guess, particular women who've been a part of history and made part of history so that younger generations know. Now, what's so terrible about that? Let me throw that at you.
Absolutely nothing is terrible about it, provided they understand that this is an accomplishment of an individual who overcame real social, I think, barriers and oftentimes legal barriers, political barriers that existed at the time, that we currently aren't responsible for, but that human life is in process all the time, right? And these people deserve to be recognized as heroes in general. And maybe in the particular because there were specific obstacles placed against them, and that's something that's valid to recognize. That just makes them more heroic in my eyes. But can you do that without denigrating men? Can you do that without denigrating anybody else? And in my view, the only way you can do that is by recognizing individual achievements. And
Miss Rand famously studied history, and I forget the quote, but she talked about needing to study history, how man had acted. Again, I'm massacring the quote, but it seems, as you said, I mean, if you study history, you learn about, and truly history, you learn about the achievements of all different types of individuals, and to your point, the context in which they happened. Part of what I think is so fascinating about Miss Rand's story, we were talking a minute before we started here, came to the country as an immigrant. We'll talk a little bit about that, but Miss Rand's perspective on femininity, sexuality is so advanced and modern even today among today's feminists. So, she was a groundbreaker, a trailblazer in so many ways, but it was her ideas and her achievements that made her so, not the fact that she happened to have a uterus.
Well, also minus the misandry that happens to permeate some of the feminist movement, right? I mean, a lot of modern feminism, I mean, was based in attempting to widen the arc of rights and so that it included them as it of course always should have and didn't. But there was a modern sort of a feminist wave that was animated by man hatred and in the attempt to exclude men from the equation of pretty much anything, from relationships to child rearing, in this false attempt for a declaration of independence on the part of women, in the sense that they've been too dependent all along, and now it's time to declare their independence, not by being actually independent, but by destroying masculinity and maleness as such and coming out against it as such. Rand wrote female heroes that were very, very powerful beings in the 40s and 50s, in the age that is held up by the left as being the cliche almost of the decades of oppression of women and them being locked into these gender roles that they couldn't get out of. Yet she had heroes that didn't fit into those roles at all. Sexually, they didn't fit into those roles at work. They were completely independent people, and not a single man, unless they're not a hero in the story, is denigrated by the stature of those women. And that is something to admire. And that is something great.
Equal to Reality, who is a YouTube member, and we thank you for that. We have a bunch of YouTube members, and that really helps Razi and the people here keep our programming coming to you with stars like Mark, with experts like James Valiant, day after day after day. He says he longs to see the day when such a day is no longer needed. I think it's pretty much redundant, but in other parts of the world, I think that it's still needed. But it seems like, Mark, we're getting more of it. It's not like once women achieve a particular level of success, they say, well, who needs Women's Day anymore? It seems like now there's more of an emphasis on picking particular days to honor particular genders, sexual preferences, races or colors or histories. So, Marilyn says we need a day to honor the individual, but it seems like we're going that other way. I mean, you talked about the whole intersectionality thing. It seems like that's where the mindset is now, this collectivist thing of not what did I do, but what did I do as part of this group or that group or that.
Or worse, I don't even think intersectionality is about accomplishment, even accomplishment within a group. It's about accidentally being placed at the intersection of oppressions, various types of oppressions. So what you achieve, quote unquote, is moral stature through victimhood. Okay. And sometimes these recognitions incorporate that and heavily stress that. And, I can't help but think that's not really a conscience speaking. That's not really somebody trying to right a generational wrong. It's really somebody trying to perpetuate unearned guilt to promote a grift of some kind. And I feel like the UN is probably one of, next to Congress and next to our own Washington, probably the biggest group of grifters out there in the world. And of course, they'll use collectivism. It's easy to use, and they'll use the ample guilt that Americans feel for their privilege, because, of course, altruism makes them feel guilty about being wealthy and working hard. And they'll use that to their advantage to leverage it for power. And sometimes that's what I feel that these days are about, I hate to say.
Yes, of course. I mean, there's always like a secondary goal with days like these. I mean, as you said, they're not going to be promoting, to Marilene's point, individualism. They're not going to be promoting Ayn Rand. They're going to be promoting, to my guess, some sort of that anti-man, capitalism hating, productivity hating philosophy that the UN is kind of known for. But what's just so sad is that, Miss Rand's story should be taught by anyone who's interested in inspiring women, people. I mean, her story, going back, as you said, I mean, coming to the US, leaving her home country, knowing she was never to come back again, not even speaking the language. And within, I don't know, was it 6 or 7 years, she'd already written a book that was headed for the bestseller, maybe 10 years tops. I mean, her whole life story is an inspiration, but yet it's kind of avoided when anyone's actually trying to promote successful women in 20th century history.
Hey, just watch her at Madison Square Garden in her interview with Phil Donahue. This is in the late 70s, towards the end of her life. Claim in the bastion of blue statism, in the bastion of leftism, that there is no such thing as a glass ceiling for women in America. Literally at the height of, practically the height of the ERA movement, and the height of this wave of feminist movement. She got booed by many people there. But she was a classic example of the fact that, yeah, in Europe, I escaped the glass ceiling, came here with nothing, and made a great project of my life, something worthy of admiration. And that is what people should look to. I see the same kinds of things happening within the Black community. There's a 1619 project, and then that inspired a backlash, but a rational backlash called United 1776, where Black authors and thinkers get together and they refute not only the 1619 project, but uphold the idea of Americanism in the sense that you've meant it, in the sense that Rand means it. And that's profound. That represents a profound shift away from what, you're saying things are getting worse. We're recognizing collectives even more. Intersectionality is like sort of the dominant culture, but there's also this backlash. It's not just right-wing, anti-woke culture, but real intellectual responses to this stuff that I think is invigorating. I think I'm losing my sense of pessimism, because I think there's enough minds that are awakened by the insanity now, who realize that their very survival rests on not just combating these ideas, but offering alternatives, rational alternatives to them. And that's starting to happen now. It's a little bit of a digression, but it's nonetheless, I think, relates to this recognition of collectives thing here today.
Yeah, and an emphasis on it seemingly as well. I mean, it's not a perfect metaphor at all, but I remember even as a young man, I guess this is in the 90s, as a kid, kind of first observing Condoleezza Rice. Now, you don't have to know like her politics, but like back then she was a really impressive woman. She was accomplished. She had moved from the private sector to the public sector. She was well spoken. She handled so she impressed me. And there wasn't.
She speaks fluent Russian as well.
And what I was aware of as a young person, there wasn't this every moment of like, well, she happens to be an African-American woman, or as a woman. It was just like Condoleezza Rice was this kind of badass professional who impressed the hell out of me. And I just feel like if your goal is trying to change people's minds about looking at people as individuals and not as parts of a group, stop talking about them always as parts of a group, and just let them succeed as individuals. And Rand always gets trotted out with great American writers or great American female writers, and she is, but she's a great writer, not just a great female writer.
Yeah. So, but that's not their goal, of course, because if you keep people in groups that have conflicting rights and claims against each other, then you keep people at war with one another. And so long as you keep people at war with one another, you as the part of the political class can take advantage of that and grow your power. And that's what they seem to do. That may sound very cynical, but I think it's an accurate reflection of what we're seeing today. They're afraid of individuals. They're afraid of individualism. You can't exploit individualism.
But even women, like I didn't read it, but I know there was an author, but I think Jennifer Burns or Mean Girls. There's all these contemporary young females who write these anti-Ayn Rand screeds. And I think, Ayn Rand was still is so far ahead of you. And as to your point, Mark, as a lover of man, as a worshiper of man, and how that doesn't denigrate a woman, that brings both men and women up and celebrates their relationship and them as individuals. Just, her perspective on femininity, on sexuality, on relationships, it's still so misunderstood. And maybe today is a good day on International Women's Day to begin to check it out.
You're probably right. Unfortunately, the gender studies programs at schools are more interested in undermining capitalism and what they think are the ancillary products of capitalism, which are gender roles as such. And so since that's their goal, and not actually studying where gender comes from and why, how the sexes actually interact with each other, and even integrating our understanding of biologies and brain chemistry, which I think would be a helpful start to understanding the differences and similarities between the sexes, they're actually out for a political end. And that's why they will not look at Rand's version of sexuality. In fact, they'll denigrate it. They'll say there's something wrong with it, or her man worship as some evidence of some kind of patriarchal structure that she can't get out from under. So I don't look for any answers from that field in the collegiate world anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, a great opportunity. We always try to emphasize to pick up something, for example, like the Romantic Manifesto, or, Atlas as a great example of, starting to learn a bit about the wonderful sensual sexuality of Miss Rand's work, writing Miss Rand's work. I have to just mention, Mark, your point about today's philosophy, perhaps, being accepting, let's just say, any gender roles. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but so if it's International Women's Day, I mean, is anyone eligible? You know what I'm saying? Like, could someone who,
yes,
you know what I'm going with
I
this?
think in the 21st century, with what the academics have foisted upon the rest of the world, this now becomes a very complex question. It's not as simple as it was before. What does International Women's Day actually mean? Since it's untethered from biology and tethered to something else, now it feels like women have been robbed of their identities.
Right. Well, and if anyone can be any gender, then what's the point of having any days, really? Like that's, could you celebrate both? Could you get Women's Day in March and then go around and get Men's Day or something else a little bit later in the year and celebrate them both? It's based on identity, based on reality.
If identity is not connected to reality at all, and you can identify as any old thing you want, and I've seen some pretty crazy identifications out there. People identify as 5-year-old kids, a person who identifies as a puppy. I mean, there's tons of crazy iterations of this. If it's not in any way touching reality, then you're right. You can't really identify anything as a day worth celebrating when it relates to human consciousness or something human, because who what does it mean?
Well, if you're interested in inspiring stories, I mean, every part of Miss Rand's life, I always feel like, the idea that she met her husband, I believe, by tripping him, right? She wanted to meet Frank O'Connor. She tripped him in order to meet him. She got herself on Cecil B. DeMille's set. She worked her way up. She like systematically tackled life day after day after day. And if you want an inspiring female story, pick up some legitimate work by Ayn Rand and reviews of Ayn Rand. Go to the Ayn Rand Institute's website and learn about this fascinating thinker, this innovative philosopher, and this truly amazing woman.
Who came to America without being able to speak that much English, and in my view has become a founding father. Every few generations, I guess, there are people that advance the views of the founding fathers, and by advance I mean progress them, elucidate them even more deeply, and further it along. I think Frederick Douglass was one of those who kept America's moral feet to the fire, tried to make America consistent with its Declaration of Independence and its Constitution. And since then, in at least as far as I can tell, Rand was the next person to take what the founders said and Aristotle and even deepen it even greater and make a more irrefutable case for the goodness of Americanism, individualism, rational egoism. And so if we're going to celebrate, are you going to, let's see it.
Well, you set it up a little bit. I mean, that's it. I mean, Rand is America's philosopher, Mark. As you said, she wrote the book that we reprinted a few years back. She's America's voice. Now, I think a lot of the people who probably celebrate Women's Day, my sense is probably don't love America. Maybe I'm projecting a little bit much, but maybe they think, America was the slave, that my sense that they might have a pretty anti-American exceptionalism perspective. But, if you love America, Ayn Rand is the American philosopher and the American voice.
Yeah, and not celebrating collectives doesn't mean you don't recognize that people suffered throughout history. I mean, human history is a long, bloody trail full of tons of injustices against all kinds of people who didn't deserve it, but we weren't evolved, of course. So these terrible things happen. What you should be celebrating is the accomplishments and achievements of individuals, irrespective of their ethnicity or their gender. That's what matters. Achievement. How much integrity do they have? How honest are they? How successful are they with respect to their command of their own world and their own universe? How much do they respect the rights and freedoms of others? These are things that we should be recognizing as virtues, as top qualities in human beings, not just groups of people pell-mell who contain both bad and good, and the insane and the sane.
Well, I'll throw one out too before we leave you this evening is another female philosopher who I know we both happen to really enjoy and respect is Dr. Tara Smith, who is, I don't know exactly what university she's associated with, but she has a number of essays, number of books, Ayn Rand's Normative Ethics, Viable Values. Read Tara Smith's books. She's, again, brilliant philosopher. Yeah, she's a woman, but just an amazing voice to avail yourself with if you're a student of objectivism like Mark and I are as well.
I agree. I read Normative Ethics. I thought it was fantastic. I thought it really developed Rand's ethics beyond what I thought was even imaginable. It's a very, very good book. She's a great thinker. Yes. On International Women's Day, Rand and Tara Smith should both be admired, and you should get their work. You should read them, devour them, because they will help you. Look, I can test. She's at the University of Texas in Austin, of course, where I think everybody with a brain is going, or most people with a brain are going. Yes, I forgot what I was going to say now because of that, but yeah, get their books because they're awesome. And even people like Rose Wilder Lane. If you read her stuff, she had a very interesting pedigree, born on the frontier and then became an international traveler and reporter, and one of the great voices of liberty in the world. Very, very intelligent, searing wit, brilliant mind. Admire those people, because you know what? They set us free. We stand atop their shoulders. They are giants, and we do stand atop their shoulders, and wouldn't be where we are right now without them.
And we feel the same way about our supporters. Thank you again, Mary Aline. Ashley Shrug says she identifies as a badass. Where's the day for that? Well, it's today, because you're a part of our philosophy posse. We thank you for that support, Ashley. Mary Aline, we thank you for that support. Bonnie, so many great supporters, and keep it tuned here, because coming up in just 2-3 hours UK time, well, it's 10 p.m. UK time, it's 3 hours from now, The Cutting Edge with Lee Pearson, Robin Stubblefield, and Steve Richens on key concepts in perception. Is perception valid or inerrant? Mark, isn't that so awesome about just the study of objectivism, is that there's so much to learn. everything from pop culture, I know when you do with the TV talk, to these guys talking about epistemology. I mean, people say, oh, I read Ayn Rand, I know Ayn Rand. I mean, we've been studying this for decades and we're still learning and exploring. So there's always more to find out.
Yeah, if you think you know Ayn Rand, all you have to do is sign up for the 3-year course at Objectivist Academic Center and find out how little you actually know.
And Mark not only completed that course, but I believe was highlighted as the star pupil one year.
Yeah, yes. Me and the Shubes, Stephen Shube, tied for number 1. So yeah, I mean, and that ain't easy. Trust me, it's a pretty challenging course, but you certainly find out the depth of your knowledge of objectivism. Oh, it's called Ayn Rand University now, not OAC. So I'm sorry, I'm just an OG man. So back in my day, it was the OAC. Anyway, if we before we leave, let's just talk about maybe 1 or 2 days that we should have, that people can celebrate and recognize something that I think would be uplifting for all. Do you have any suggestions? I have 1 or 2. I'll go after you guys.
I mean, it's funny. It makes me think of Dr. Brooke often says, if you met Jeff Bezos, what would you say? If you met Jeff Bezos, because if I think about someone who basically has improved my life, big picture, and what would I say other than just thank you? You may have met Jeff Bezos. Would you be like, you owe me money, Bezos? Where's, what you did this? You just say, thank you. So, I'd like something to maybe acknowledge some of the true business entrepreneurs as a juvenile diabetic, perhaps the gentleman from Genentech who invented insulin, synthetic insulin. There's so many business people in my mind. It sounds a little cliche, but business people who, boy, they improved my life. So just to be able to thank them would be enough for me.
Well, they're so vilified in American culture, ironically, but Rand, I think, said it best, and I'm paraphrasing, that, businessmen only exist in free countries. In other places, they're bureaucrats. And you want the businessman because to the extent that they're here, that means you're free. Believe it or not, regardless of your ideology, you should get that through your head fast. Yeah, we should definitely, I think, have a inventors recognition day, and you could probably almost populate the yearly calendar with a day that somebody invented something that was very useful to humanity.
And I'll just say Adam Mossoff on Twitter, the professor, does exactly that with patents. So he's a patent expert, an objectivist patent expert. So he does exactly that. Some of the amazing innovations that every day people have come up with that make our lives better. So let's honor them. And women.
Yes, we need to be reminded of that. We also need to be reminded not of oppression, because we all know that existed, but liberation, freedom. We need today to recognize what that means exactly, because some people think it means separating them, making them immune to what's metaphysically given as opposed to man-made force. And we need people to recognize that. We need a National Individual Day so that people understand that the smallest minority in the world is the individual. And that individual is also the source of values and thought, and that sovereignty is a recognition of that. So those days that are marked out like that, I think, will help people get more in tune with what will make them not only successes potentially in the material world, that may or may not happen, but certainly a success in your interior world. And philosophy can do that for you if you take it seriously, folks.
Well, I'd like to think that the UN is going to be doing that, Mark, but on the 15th, it is International Day to Combat Islamophobia. And then on the 20th, it's French Language Day. So we're going to contact them, see if they can fit it in. But until then, we're going to keep it here for Cutting Edge in just a few hours. And we'll be back here with more of the Daily Objective. I know we want to thank our listeners and our viewers so much for being part of what we do.
Thank you very much. I'll talk to you guys later. Peace.
Well, thank you, and best premises to all.